20 years ago tomorrow it's hard to believe. I mean, 20 years ago tomorrow, 20 years ago this week, I wasn't even in California. I was in Kansas. And I was living at Prairie Ridge Apartments in Lawrence, Kansas. And I was working at Burger King at that time, which was not that far from where I lived. It was in walking distance, if not bike riding distance. But yeah, 20 years ago was, especially tomorrow, something I'll never forget. I mean, I remember basically getting up that morning, because I didn't have to go in till later. I remember getting up that morning, washing up, eating some breakfast, just getting myself kind of relaxed a little bit, kind of get my mind, in the mode, if you will, for work. Just, take my time before leaving the house later that day and going to work. But that mode that I was trying to get myself in, that mindset I was trying to get myself in for work, it, like anybody else's mindset, went out the window that day. And I'm not trying to say that, literally, I'm saying that figuratively. Along with everybody else's mindsets that were basically focused on going to work, trying to, or either enjoying their day off or whatever the mindset was that day, just completely went out the door, went out the window, mainly because of what we saw on the news. And I remember tuning on the news and seeing this, and seeing what happened. I'm thinking, what's going on here? And a lot of people, and I'm thinking at first, like anybody else, okay, somebody accidentally crashed a plane into the World Trade Center. So I go to call my dad, I go to call my mom, I go to call my family to tell them, hey, did you see what happened to the World Trade Center? And I think honestly, the moment I turned my head just briefly, that's when I heard on the news that a second plane had hit the other trade tower. And suddenly it started to dawn on me that, this is no accident. These are not, people, these are not pilots that are just, losing control of the planes almost simultaneously. It's like, no, this is an attack. So basically it's right there. The moment they talked about the second plane crashing, and I saw the replay of it, it was like, yeah, this is not no accident. It's not, some coincidental accidents by two pilots that lost control or anything. This is an attack. And then you start hearing about a plane going down in the fields of Pittsburgh, or in the fields outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You hear about a plane crashing into the Pentagon, almost simultaneously, almost within sync of each other or something. And you knew that none of these were just, pilots losing control. This was an attack. It was a terrorist attack. And it changed everybody's mindsets, for a long time, if not forever. Because anybody that had to work that day, went to work, and like me, they realized that life had changed. Because I remember leaving the house later that day and walking down to my job, and nearly all of the street going towards my job was empty. Nobody was out. I mean, there were a few people out, but not many. Nearly everything was just empty, silence. It was crazy. It was crazy. And I remember we had a guy that was, he wasn't of the, I'll put it this way, he wasn't of the descent or the culture that these terrorists were part of, but the way he looked and the way he talked, even though he was a friendly guy, it really made a lot of people uncomfortable around him. And you could feel it. The moment I walked in, and even before I got there, I was like, oh, this guy's, he's not going to, be very welcomed around there. And, for a while, a lot of people just, kind of, kept away from him. They didn't talk to him much. And he kind of kept to himself, because I think he realized that even though he's not part of that culture, that terrorist culture, you know, if you will, that he knew he would he'd still be looked at very suspiciously because, you know, he looked like them, but he wasn't, you know, part of them, if you know what I mean. He wasn't part of their race. I'll put it that way. And it's just one of those moments that you never forgot, and you would never forget for a while. As a matter of fact, I remember a couple of times just, you know, on the anniversary, being on the intercom, you know, just, you know, telling people, let's never forget. And some people would acknowledge, hey, I'm never going to forget. You know, and I'll be doing drive-through and saying that. You know. But getting back to that morning, I remember when all this started to go down, I called my dad. He was asleep. I think he was asleep still. He didn't get his phone, didn't answer his phone till later. And then I tried to call my mom out here, because that was my first instinct. My first instinct, just like anybody else, was to call my family. And that's what I did. And I couldn't get a hold of her, couldn't get a hold of my sisters, because I think it was still early for them. It was like 9 o'clock where I was. It was about 8 o'clock where I was, 6, 7 where they were. I couldn't get a hold of anybody, you know, out there or, you know, my dad until later. And then that's when I said, I'm going to call my aunt. And I called my aunt in Hayward, and she was like, well, what's going on? She said, you see news? And she turned on the news, and she's like, oh my God. She couldn't believe what was going on. It's just mesmerizing. It's just mesmerizing. And I can tell you this, when I finally got to talk to my dad, and we talked about this entire situation, I'll be honest with you, I have never seen my dad so angry. And it wasn't the kind of anger he used to have when he would get in arguments with my mom or get in arguments, you know, with, you know, landlords or people he felt was a threat to his family. This was an anger of, you just messed with the wrong country and I'm pissed about it. And if he could still do it, he would have volunteered to go and fight these guys. That's how pissed off he was. And I'll never forget that moment, because again, all I remember is just standing there. I have the remote in my hand. Here's the TV. I have the remote in my hand, and I'm just standing there, and I'm like, I couldn't believe it. And I think I dropped the remote once or twice. Well, actually once. I dropped it once, because I was in shock. I could not believe what was going on. And again, my first instinct, call the family, see how they're doing, see, make sure they're okay. It just flabbergasted me what was going on. Because here's the thing, you hear about all these historic events that occur. You hear about all these historic events that occur in American history, and you never think once that in your generation, in your lifetime, you're going to be part of something like that. Well, guess what? 20 years ago, we were. 20 years ago, we were. And here's what's crazy about this. Here's what's crazy about this. I would work with social workers. I had people checking up on me, working with me, you know, in places, you know, on my financial stuff, on my living situation, making sure I was okay, making sure I had this, making sure I did that and this, you know, all that. I had people that watched out for me, you know, from a place called Independence Inc. And this one lady that I had, she basically, you know, drove me to Independence Inc. because we would go there, you know, to, you know, do our appointments sometimes. She would meet at my apartment at times, but then she would drive me there, or we'd go get something to eat, to talk, and all that. And I'll never forget the fact that she told me she had friends and family that were running during that event. They were running and they were getting covered in the dust, in the soot, everything. It was just, I couldn't believe it, because I was like, you know, I have somebody that's working with me that knows people that, you know, are running away from that scene in New York. I just couldn't believe, I just couldn't believe how impactful it was, you know, becoming for a lot of us. Not just in New York, but for all of us across the country, because, you know, because here I am, I'm working with a social worker, and she's telling me this, and it's just flabbergasted. Like I said, it flabbergasted me. I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe what she was telling me. But here's the thing, as a lot of people have said, after that day, and even after that year, and in the past 20 years, America has bounced back, and we've bounced back stronger than ever. I mean, here's the thing, you can dislike who becomes president, all you want. You can dislike that person all you want. But if there's one common thread that each of these presidents have, is they do have America's best interest in mind. It may not seem like it to people, it may not sound like it to people, but they do. They have America's best interest in mind. And ever since what happened 20 years ago, our military has become stronger than it ever has been. It has gotten to a point that if they try anything in the future, that this military will blow them out of the sky. They won't even be able to let off one trigger of a sound, and this military will take them out. But yeah, I will never forget where I was. I'll never forget the reaction my father had. When we would talk about it. I'll never forget the reaction my aunt had when I talked to her on the phone about it, when I finally got to hold of my mom and my sisters. Never forgot any of that. Never. And I'll never forget the fact that I had a social worker, a caseworker from Independence Inc. that knew friends and family that were running away from what was going on. They were getting covered in the dust, in the suit, and all that. Never forget that. But I just wanted to come on here and give you my thoughts, my remembrance 20 years later as to where I was, how it affected me, my family, and those close to me. But what are your thoughts? Comment down below, live chat during the premiere, like the video, check out the Teespring store, and I am out.